historic day here in the city of Tallahassee. We want to thank you for being a part and joining us on this historic occasion. But everything's historic this year, right? Because we've done things we've never done before, thanks to COVID. This afternoon, we have the pleasure of commemorating and celebrating the ratification of the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution. And you may be saying, what is that all about? Well, there's been some great conversation going on in our country about the freeing of slaves. And well, what we've learned is that it happened in one state on one day, it happened in another state on another day, but on December 6, 1865, the Constitution ratified, Congress ratified the 13th Amendment of the Constitution, and then that freed slaves in all states, because there were not just slaves in southern states, there were slaves in other states, and this freed all slaves. And so today we're coming to celebrate, commemorate, and to share some knowledge. We have world-renowned historians who've been doing this work for a very long time. I'm going to introduce you to them shortly. We have folks from all over the state of Florida. We have those who've been in this effort for a long time, and we have those who the baton is being passed to continue to carry the torch of education to make sure that we carry this information forward. And I am City Commissioner Diane Williams-Cox, and it is indeed my pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. Many of the individuals that we'll be talking with today, I know. Some I've worked with already, and some I'm looking forward to working with to continue to educate as we continue to celebrate and commemorate the freedom of all slaves. First, I'm going to go across my panel, Ms. Althemese Barnes, local historian here in Tallahassee. You cannot say the Riley House name without thinking about Ms. Barnes. While she wasn't the first to do some of the work that's been done at the Riley House, she is certainly the one who has continued and done a lot of the work to make sure that the Riley House has been recognized all across the state and all across this country. She also received an appointment from President Barack Obama when he was in office. What we've done here in the city of Tallahassee is we've embraced the history and of the Riley House and the work that Ms. Barnes has done. And the city of Tallahassee has brought the Riley House into the city's operations. And so now the Riley House is a part of the city of Tallahassee. Ms. Barnes has retired, but we know that Ms. Barnes does not retire. So thank you, Ms. Barnes, for being here with us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
Next to in my square is Mr. Clifton Lewis from Bartow, Florida. Mr. Lewis is also a historian who is his best work is known for the L.B. Brown House down in Bartow, Florida. He went in 1989, moved into that area, and saw that the historic house was in need of repairs. And he went in with some other folks, and they helped rebuild and renovate. And today, there's a beautiful, if you are not familiar with it, then I encourage you to go online and research. There's a beautiful two-story home in Bartow. It's a museum that he is the executive director of. And so he is rightly full of a lot of this history and this knowledge, and you'll be hearing from him in our first sector. In my square beneath Mr. Lewis is, I call her Senator Thompson because she was senator here in the state of Florida from 2012 to 2016, but she has returned. And you know, when you do a great job, you get to come back. So what she has done is that she has not only broken some glass ceilings, she's knocked down some doors, and she was elected back to the House of Representatives here in the state of Florida in a district out of Orlando, District 44, that had never been represented by an African-American female. And so we welcome her. She also found a project in Orlando that needed to repair and restore. It's the Wells-Built Museum that she and her foundation and staff have brought back to prominence. And she has a lot of history as well. She's a well-known historian. For those of you who may have followed her in the Florida legislature, she never let an opportunity pass to not educate her colleagues on our culture. I really fondly remember her giving them all history lessons, especially in the month of February, but anytime they needed a lesson, she was there to do it. And I will just give her a plug that she and I share something in common. You see the sign behind her, Biden Harris. Harris happens to be a sorority sister of ours. So thank you for being with us today, Representative / Senator Thompson.
Okay.
Next to Ms. Thompson is Mataki Akbar. Now, Mataki Akbar is probably our youngest panelist. And I will tell you that it is indeed a pleasure to have him with us today. He is a local attorney here in Tallahassee. And when we talk about legal minds, he is one of the sharpest legal minds in our country. And he doesn't mind doing what he does to help people. He is here as the president-elect of the local chapter of the NAACP here in Tallahassee. He will take office in January, and we thought it would be very fitting to bring our future to this panel to have a discussion, because so many times, you know, we get together and talk about it. We leave the younger people out of it, but we need them to know their history, be aware of their history, and of course he does, because his dad is a well-renowned psychologist, Naacp Akbar. So he's firmly rooted and grounded. Thank you for being with us today, Attorney Akbar. Next, we have our representative from the United States Colored Troops Association, the president, Mr. Jarvis Rosier. Now, if you've been around Emancipation Day in Tallahassee any number of years, you will see Mr. Rosier participating in the reenactment of what happened on Emancipation Day. And that was the reading of the Emancipation Proclamation on the steps of the Knott House here in Tallahassee. You'll also see him addressing the colored troop graves at a local cemetery here. But I always look forward to hear what Mr. Rosier has to say. And I'm calling you Mr. Rosier. I know you have an official title, but to not mess it up, I'm going to let you say it when your time comes. So thank you very much. And next we have my colleague on the county side with his Howard hat on, Commissioner Bill Proctor. We call him $1 billion Bill because $1 billion Bill has, during his campaign, he let us know that he has been responsible for more than $1 billion coming into his district, District 1 in the city of Tallahassee, in the county. And he is the clear voice. Yes, the clear voice. And you'll learn that not only is he that, but he's also a professor at Florida A&M University, where he teaches constitutional law. So he knows something about what we're talking about today, and he's going to share it with us in his usual manner, and how he makes it very clear. That's why they say he's a clear voice and make it very, very plain. So we welcome you here, Commissioner Proctor. He also is in all his rights. He's a pastor of a church. So we thank you for working on the Sabbath to educate our future generations. And last but not least of who's listed here, my Rattler brother, Timothy Barber, a mighty Rattler who received his education in some other places, but also he finished did a good part of his education at Florida A&M University and went to work as an archivist, as an archivist intern. But you can tell from the books behind him, he's no longer an intern. He's an archivist by all rights. And he is the executive director. Let me make sure I get this right. He is the executive director of the Blight Archives History and Research Foundation of South Florida. And I am glad to connect with you. And we're happy to have you with us, and we look forward. Now, I talked about Mataki being our youngest panelist. You know, you may be in that, you all may be colleagues and maybe in that same age group, but we're glad to have you guys here with us because we need you to help us carry our future. And not listed here yet, but will be joining us shortly. We're having some technical difficulties, is the board president of the NAACP, Chairman Leon Russell. And if any of you have been around any amount of time, you know that Mr. Russell brings a wealth of knowledge, and he speaks with authority because he knows what he's talking about, and he has the gift, as they say, and he has to use it. So we're looking forward to hearing from him as soon as he's able to join us. We have this thing broken up because this is a rich panel group, and we have it broken up into 3 sessions. The first session will focus on the road to emancipation. And this is going to cover the period from 1860, when Lincoln was sworn in as President of the United States, to January 1st, 1863, which was the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. Our panelists for this group will be none other than Leon County Commissioner Bill Proctor, and Clifton Lewis, the curator of the L.B. Brown House in Bartow, and historian with the Florida Museum Network. This format is conversational. We have allotted time, and so we just want Mr. Lewis, you and Commissioner Proctor, to talk to us about how did this all start and how did we get here?
Well, I'll be delighted to defer to Commissioner Proctor if he wants to lead, or otherwise I could begin. How do you want to start, Commissioner?
I just defer to you, Dr. Lewis, respecting your historic grasp. I actually was going to back down to Chief Justice Taney's comments and Dred Scott to show the hard line of where the Supreme Court saw the people who were African in our society. But I'm going to defer. I'm adaptive, but you take us and launch this thing forward.
Okay, very good. I believe that by way of laying a foundation for the subsequent segments to come, and trying to get to that day of December the 6th, 1865, when that wonderful 13th Amendment was finally ratified, we ought to recognize how we got there. The road to the 13th Amendment ran through the Civil War. Those who attempt to interpret the Emancipation Process without considering that Civil War makes a terrible mistake. It's absolutely impossible to do, because the Civil War drove all of the decisions. The question that might be asked, what was it about Lincoln's election that triggered secession? Why did the secessionists leave in response to Lincoln's election? And of course, that was because they knew that in spite of Lincoln's statement in his first inaugural, that he had no intentions of interfering with slavery, they knew that Lincoln was opposed to the system of slavery. No, Lincoln did not have a high regard for the slaves, but he detested the system of slavery, and they knew it. That's what triggered South Carolina to secede, and then Mississippi, and then Florida in rapid succession, so that by the time Lincoln took office in April of 1861, 7 of the 15 slave states had already left the Union. That was one question I thought we needed to get to, because Lincoln was opposed to slavery. Another question I thought we might want to answer, and this is one that brings about a lot of debate. What was the cause of the Civil War? And it's amazing that we even had that debate. Because we can simply go to the Constitution of the Confederate States of America, or we can consult the Articles of Secession. And I would just like to share just a brief clause in the Articles of Secession, which the secessionists wrote, and then I'll defer back to the commissioner. And in the Articles of Secession, it's written that, quote, in the momentous step our state has taken to dissolve its connection with the government of which we so long form a part, it is but just that we should declare the prominent reason which have induced our course of leaving the Union. And this is their position, quote, our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest in the world. Its labor supplies the product which constitutes by far the largest and most important portion of commerce of the earth, end quote. And so the leaders of the Confederates say that their cause was thoroughly related to the issue of slavery. And that's pretty clear to me. Commissioner, I defer to you if you want to make any comments.
Very good. Thank you very much. I believe that those comments are objectively stated, but the reason behind the reason is not necessarily a benevolent motivation. But I must say that Abraham Lincoln was the most polarizing figure as a president, with the exception of Barack Obama. You either ran and supported and empathized with that brother, or you ran away from that brother. But that man, for whatever was the dynamics of his being, he polarized a nation. But now, as Dr. Lewis just indicated, a declaration that we're trying to end slavery is not necessarily motivated for Sunday school reasons, because also the Industrial Revolution and the industry which are evolving, emanating in the North, and the need for labor to make modern factories a part of the fabric of the Northern economy. So the slave, the labor, if you will, contained in the Southern states, agrarian, were not giving up this labor pool. And a part of what Lincoln had done in that emancipation was it was made applicable only to states that were in rebellion to the Union. It was not universally extinguishing slavery ubiquitously all across the nation, only in areas. So Lincoln did say that this was a military gesture. It was to induce, it was to incite, and it was to seduce the African to run away, to perpetrate insurrection, and maybe to entice their manhood, manliness, to pursue freedom. But these folks had been locked down for 244 years by the time of this emancipation. And I don't know about y'all, but 244 years is a long time. In that operant and classical conditioning of reward punishment, most Black folk found the reward of food, a little shack and little breeches and clothes. That reward was captured in slavery, and there was not a large enough experience in freedom that Lincoln's emancipation was that much of an appeal. They're like inviting me to go to the moon, inviting me to go to Mars. What is that? I don't know. So I think that we're dealing with words on a sheet of paper that did not register in the psyche of people who've been in bondage for 244 years. I think that we have to reconcile, and I'm not that person capable, but a sheet of paper by Lincoln against a mass of 4 million people who don't know what the word freedom means, look like, taste like nothing. It just didn't do what he thought it was going to do. My final point is to make sure that everybody is very clear as to the status as recent, the pulse check of the Supreme Court with Dred Scott, where Judge Roger Taney indicates that a Black man has no rights. This is 1857, which is 4 years before the Civil War. Supreme Court declares a Black man has no rights, which by law a white man is bound to respect. This is a tremendous moment of which the significance of Lincoln's sheet of paper did not weigh in the white mind because they had no concept of Black freedom, and it didn't register in the Black mind as clearly because neither did they. Thank you.
I think it's highly appropriate that we discuss the unfairness of slavery. And I think also that we need to look at the Emancipation Proclamation, as I said before, in the context of the Civil War. Its intent was not necessarily the freedom of the slave. It was to end the Civil War, thus save the Union. And of course, if you look at it objectively, as cold as that might sound, if the Union had not been saved, then the question of freedom or slavery would have already been decided. in favor of continued slavery, because the Confederacy was committed to retaining slavery. So when Lincoln was compelled to notify the world that he was thinking about issuing a proclamation, which was a War Power Act, incidentally, he made that announcement on September 22nd, 1862. And it was really a threat. It was a threat to the Confederacy that if you do not stop fighting and rejoin the Union within 100 days, this was on September 22nd, 1862, within 100 days, I will sign this executive order, this proclamation, freeing your slave. And whether it actually freed all of the slaves in the Confederacy or not, about 3.5 million of them, was almost irrelevant to Lincoln's aim, because his aim was to undermine the Confederacy. That whole Confederacy, socially and economically and otherwise, rested on slavery. And when he attacked that system of slavery with that Emancipation Proclamation's announcement, the preliminary proclamation in September 1862, it shook the confidence. It rocked the foundation of the Confederacy. And it really was a turning point in the Civil War, because many of those enslaved individuals, even upon the announcement, even before he signed the document, many of the enslaved began walking off the plantation. They became difficult for most of these women who've been left behind to deal with. And so the white soldiers and the Confederates began to abandon their post to go back home to take care of their families. And that further weakened the Confederacy. And so the objective of the Emancipation Proclamation was, one, to end the Civil War and save the Union. And in so doing, it would free 3.5 million of the 4 million slaves. So that was kind of the purpose of that. And as I might add, we just read the last part of the Emancipation Proclamation where Lincoln, he told us why he issued it. Upon this act, an act of justice issued upon military necessity, he said, I invoke the considerate judgment of mankind and the gracious favor of Almighty God, end quote. It was issued on military necessity. He was trying to undermine, and he did. The Emancipation Proclamation achieved its objective of what Lincoln had intended for it to do. Now, of course, it didn't end the system of slavery, but it induced thousands, upon hundreds of thousands of those enslaved to walk off the plantation into an uncertain future. So that would be my point about the Emancipation Proclamation. One other point I make is that for those who might be inclined to dismiss Lincoln's involvement in freedom, as you will hear in the fourth segment, Lincoln not only signed the Emancipation Proclamation, but he drafted and signed the 13th Amendment. Whereas the 13th Amendment was ratified 6 months after he died, Lincoln had the mind to sign that 13th Amendment as soon as Congress sent it to him in late January, early February of 1865. He signed it before sending it on to the states for ratification. That's why the deceased Lincoln's signature appears at the bottom of that 13th Amendment. He signed both documents because he thought it would be the main event, the principal act of his administration and the main event of the 19th century.
Well, I just want to, if I might, Madam Moderator, I am not as totally convicted about the effect or the benevolent cause of Mr. Lincoln as is Dr. Lewis. I simply say that when you sign a document and you done already divorced somebody and walked out the house, and then you say, and by the way, this, and this, and turn the lights off, and this, and this, and pay the bill, I think that the South had already succeeded from the Union. That sheet of paper that Lincoln filed as an act of psychological war did not free, but it was intended to induce. It was intended to disturb the mind and induce and say to the slave, if they got the message, yo, come this way, we got freedom over here. Now, again, what is freedom? Every time, if you look at Article 4 in the Constitution, for the slave to escape, there was a Fugitive Slave Act in Article 4. Anytime an African went toward the word freedom, hell, he could lose his life. So it was a dangerous word in and of itself. And there has never been any assurance, there's never been any green light from the federal government or anybody else that would say, come, we have you officially, we got your back. So I will say this, thank goodness for the emancipation, because it serves as a precursor. And when the war ended, thus there was a policy objective as to what the ending of the Civil War would mean. And it served a purpose, a seed planted, that when the war concluded, it gave a directive that the slave was to be free. So to that extent, I'm sure that Dr. Lewis and I are on the same page that this is a major seed that directed the United States on what to do. Then finally, it's very important to understand how important this seed is. What makes these states united is the fact that they agreed from the giddy up on what the role of the African would be. We wouldn't be united in the first place. And what the South was telling these folks is on the 10th Amendment that all powers not enumerated to the federal government, y'all just wrong. It's left to the states and the people to decide. Technically, they were right. It was a state decision as to whether or not they would hold slavery, because there's nothing enumerated that the federal government would have control over. So I'm just delighted to be a part of the conversation. I'll pull up and save for others to speak. Thank you.
Commissioner Cox, as much as the introduction took so much of our 30 minutes, I would like to just close.
Hey, I had 45 minutes, Dr. Lewis. 45.
You know how preachers and mics are.
Allow me to make this closing comment. The late Dr. John Hope Franklin said that the Emancipation Proclamation is seldom remembered and widely misunderstood. The proclamation was not Lincoln's choice for free and ending slavery. It was gradual, compensated, and initially he had about colonizing the slave. But Lincoln was pushing the idea of gradual and compensated emancipation. Gradual in that the slave will be freed, but in groups. In other words, he said that if the state would adopt a law outlawing slavery, then the federal government would pay them, for example, $400 per slave. Each slave over the age of 35 would immediately be freed once the state passed that law. And every year thereafter, when the slave reached the age of 35, that person would be freed. That was the gradualism. The compensation, of course, was the $400. But he eventually dropped the component about colonization because Frederick Douglass and others objected so strongly. So the point being that Lincoln's preferred means was by legislation, and it was gradualism with compensation. I think I'll cut it off here, and we need to move, I guess, to the next segment. Maybe I could ask questions later on.
Yes, and thank you. We will have a segment where we can do questions and answer. And let me just say, this has been just right out the gate. This has been some great information, and I hope that those who are able to watch, we're on the City of Tallahassee channel, Comcast and Xfinity channel 13, and unfortunately, we were not able to go do it live on Facebook, I'm being told, but it will be aired on Facebook later. This is being recorded and will be put out to Facebook later. But this has been already, I'm on the edge of my seat to see where we're going to go next. So as we say that, I was told that my intro was 15 minutes, so I took some of y'all's time. So hey, we'll give it to you in the wash. How about that? We're going to go on to our next segment. I'm going to anyone who's watching, if you have questions, feel free to put it in the chat, or we're going to address those questions when we get to the question and answer session at the end. Our second session is Emancipation and Commemorations. And our panelists for that section is Jarvis Rosier, Tim Barber, and Mrs. Barnes. And those three historians are going to take us into this next session.
Okay. As I listened, I reflected, this is Althemese Barnes, I reflected on something that Hunter Hill, who is one of our most senior emancipation drummers, often says. And it's that he's not sure what Mr. Lincoln's intent was. He tends not to debate that, but all he knows is that on May 20th, 1865, according to what his ancestors passed on to him, they walked away to freedom. And so I come more from a public historian point of view and a personal sharing, because I live in Florida and, of course, the capital city and capital county, where the official reading was made on May 20th, 1865. From a child, before I even knew myself, knew places where I was going, we would always go back into the rural part of Lynn County for these gatherings. So when I reached a point where it was time to go to school, and back then you started primer, so I went to the Griffin Academy, which was started by the Florida Primitive Baptist Convention, which Commissioner Proctor, I'm sure they're familiar with. They started a school in 1905. And when I started school, not in 1905, but after that, we knew that May 20th, we weren't going to school. And on that day, everybody who knew the history knew that we were going back into the rural area, which was plantation land. But by the time I came along, a lot of it had been acquired by Blacks, and they were farming independently. Of course, there were some still tenant farmers and sharecroppers, but a lot of independent farmers. And we would go back to the churches usually for the commemoration. In Tallahassee, Miccosukee Road, there was Testarena. Right next to it was the one-room schoolhouse. And we would go in for the service, and then the children would play, and the adults would gather outside, and we would just have a gathering, celebration. The opposite year, I remember sometimes we would go to St. Peter's Primitive Baptist Church. Next to it was a one-room school, the Rainy School, and the same thing would happen. So that occurred until I reached the 5th grade. And at that time, the Lynn County School District started giving some limited funding to this private Christian school. And about 2 years later, the annual holiday, May 20th, for us ceased. However, even then, when we got out of school, we knew to get home quickly so that we could get in my father's truck and ride to wherever we were going for the May 20th celebration. So that's just to, when we talk about commemoration, to take us back in time to how long this has occurred. One other thing I want to interject is that Hunter Hill's grandmother, who was also Frank Williams's grandmother, started one of the first 20th commemorations in Tallahassee, Lynn County, out on Winthrop's land, Winthrop Plantation. And of course, my step-great-grandmother was also a co-founder with Miss Sarah Hill. Those two people started the commemoration there back in 1867. So that shows how far we go back. Now, there is a publication by Mary Catherine May that I would suggest everybody see too, because it's not only talking about Tallahassee and Lynn County, but there were commemorations that happened in all parts of the Panhandle And also Jacksonville was a huge area. We have news clips from the Weekly Floridian and also the Florida Times Union that documents those commemorations. Charlene from Delray sent me a news clip from as far down as Delray, where her ancestors and the seniors in that community had a commemoration of May 20th when the slaves in Florida were freed. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to bring that personal perspective to it, that there are many people who even now with the Florida Department of State in year 2000 took an interest in this and said, you know, this was a great occurrence in our state, and we need to recognize this in our history. So since 2000, the Florida Department of State, the Florida African American Heritage Preservation Network have joined together, and we commemorate every year. We bring museum directors and historians from Central Florida and from Pensacola into Tallahassee. Well, we come 2 days because we do a workshop the day before, but they are here for the May 20th commemoration. So that's my input as a personal testimony. Now, Jarvis, our United States Colored Troops, I'll pass my hat to him.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Barnes. And thank you, Commissioner Cox, for this great panel of distinguished guests. I feel honored. I'll try to stay in my lane. There's just so much to talk about. We talk about the Constitution. You know, if you think about the Constitution, they don't see the word slave in there. There's a reason, because it was a little touchy word back then so much. You know, that the Constitution allowed for 20 more years of the light slave trade, and there was just so much. And the 3/5 and the fugitive slave actually talked about it for the 3/5. Thomas Jefferson went on in 1800 election. So, you know, there's just, so let me get back in my life, okay? We're talking about the Emancipation Proclamation. When it came up, January 1, 1863, actually ratified, came in September of 1862. As far as the state of Florida, General Cook wrote in the time with 300 men from the 2nd Cavalry that were stationed in Macon, Georgia. They wrote into Tallahassee, representative of Tallahassee, received the surrender of Florida from Confederate General Sam Jones, who was commanding general then. Actually, on May 19th, a group of slaves that were assimilated to the military posts in Centerville Road, that's called now, were notified of being free a day before. But May 20th, emancipation was read on the steps of the Hager House, which is now called the Naacp.
Mr. Rosier, let me, I hate to interrupt you, but we seem to be having some audio issues with your presentation. So can you, I don't know if there's something going on with your Wi-Fi.
Mr. Rosier, if you can close out any applications open on your computer, and if we have to, you can turn off your camera so that we can hear you clearly. That will help with your CP usage.
Okay, I'm going to refer to Tim if you want to go ahead and I'll try to take care of the problems.
Okay, Mr. Barber, why don't you go ahead while we work on those technical issues with Mr. Rosier?
Yes, I want to say thank you for allowing me to be a part of this panel. I want to segue a little bit and just bring some understanding, piggybacking off of Commissioner Proctor. Dr. Proctor said it best when he talked about the 10th Amendment. And currently, with the nature of the nature of the United States right now, when you're dealing with people in the Black Lives Matter movement and how important today is, many people, when these things were happening across the country, they began to try to find some type of anchor to. And, you know, when you talk about the 13th Amendment and how people are celebrating emancipation, the 10th Amendment said it best: the states had the power. Slavery was about business. That's what it was about. It wasn't about human kindness. It was strictly business for the white people in the United States. So you know, when you talk about whether we celebrate, you heard Ms. Barnes talk about May, was it May 20th?
Yeah.
Then you talk about Juneteenth. Each state had its own date of emancipation. West Virginia, I believe, was actually the last to kind of put their claws into it. So, you know, initially the bill failed because it was Democratic control of the House of Representatives when Lincoln was around in his first term. And they needed the 2/3 majority to make it, to ratify it. And then Georgia came on as a 27th state of the 27 states out of the 36 at the time, I believe, that they needed the votes they needed in order to ratify this agreement. But the most immediate impact of 13th Amendment was the end of chattel slavery as a practice in some say the South, but in the United States. I always like to kind of talk about, we talk about Jim Crow, but I think that James Esquire was a lot tougher than Jim Crow because with the advent of television and cameras and media, you know, they were no longer able to kind of do the barbaric methods of giving blacks or giving blacks the problem of freedom in America. But it was really James Esquire that began to write laws. I mean, heard Dr. Clifton talk about, I think it was Jarvis maybe mentioned that that there was the word slavery wasn't in the Constitution, and you look at these amendments when they wrote this amendment, how they allowed for a loophole in the amendment to where incarceration became the driving force. If you notice, every time, excuse my French, white folks change something, they already create something else that supplement whatever they was trying to do in the first place. From tenants to sharecropping to tenant to then arresting people for the smallest of issues. So we celebrate this emancipation because it was the beginning of to where we are today. But if we don't learn from yesterday, if we don't learn from our past, we would never know when they're trying to take us back. And over again, they're taking us back. They're taking us back with all the things that are going on. So I like to celebrate the emancipation, and I like the fact that Florida had theirs read on May 20th and not Juneteenth, which is something I don't celebrate at Juneteenth. I really celebrate May 20th historically. But it's what we learn from these amendments, what we learn from what people have done that is taking us and moving us forward. So, you know, I'm celebrating it, but we still had a major issue after that because they used the criminal system to keep blacks under control, to still get free labor. Because again, the ending of slavery was business. It wasn't a moral issue. It was straight business, if you look at it from that standpoint.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barber. Mr. Rosier, you think we're going to give it another try?
Y'all can try again.
Why don't you take your camera off and just unmute yourself so we can hear you, because that may be a part of the issue. Okay.
You hear me now?
He turned his mic.
Okay. Yeah, you're calling from, why don't you try it from your phone? I see you have another connect. We're still having trouble hearing you. Okay. No, why don't you, okay. Just connect from your phone. Let's see, can we hear you now?
Okay, I'm on the laptop.
Okay. Go ahead and we'll see how it goes. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm just hearing the feedback that I'm hearing.
Yeah, we really want to hear what you have to say. Okay, try from your phone. Okay. While he does that, I don't want to leave this segment. There was a whole lot that was said there. We had the personal the personal touch from Mrs. Barnes, and then we got the economic touch from Mr. Barber, economic and legal. So while we wait for Mr. Rosier to join us, Commissioner Proctor and Mr. Lewis, anybody want to just jump in for just a moment while we have this moment of intercession while we wait, intermission, I should say.
Well, it's interesting as we look, I'm asking Dr. Lewis to walk with me on this, Dr. Lewis, that when you look at the 13th Amendment, of course, it abolishes slavery. And yet, like a good white law, it has a backdoor escape hatch. You can't have slavery, but if you can change their status to a convict, then you can lock them up, throw away the key, and you got them right back. So look at the words of this particular document, and the only thing you've got to do is change their status to a convicted person, and you got them right back locked up. So let's make sure that we are focused on these words, and the only status change you need is a court boom, boom stamp to say this person done something wrong.
Yeah, and if I can chime in just on that, I mean, that loophole, it permitted this massive criminalization of blackness that was defined in the amendment, post-emancipation. This experience from Jim Crow to the prison industrial complex was that route. I think that I would love to have been a fly on the wall when this thing was being drawn up, just like when they was drawing up not the Emancipation Proclamation, but the rights issue where they said all men are created equally. You know, I think that if they can go back and change that from all men to all white men, they would kind of, that would kind of segue. But that became a major issue. The fact that they still needed free labor, and they found another way to do it through the emancipation, through the 13th Amendment.
And I can't wait to hear from Mr. Russell, because that 10th Amendment is still a loose cannon in the American Constitution. That 10th Amendment is a dangerous beast, ain't been stapled down. You got folks jumping around, hopping around Georgia last night, talking about that 10th Amendment is a monster. And that 10th Amendment, it still stands against the 14th Amendment, the 13th Amendment, the 15th Amendment, and anything that civil rights organization have fought against. The 10th Amendment folk crowd sit there and holler, hey, this ain't in the U.S. Constitution. This is a state decision to be made. Exactly. So I hope Mr. Russell will touch and let us know what a live grenade this thing is, that 10th Amendment.
Well, before we get too far off the rails, because I know this is red meat right here. Mr. Rosier, are you able to communicate with us yet?
I'm trying to get off the phone. I don't know if you hear me now, if it's any better.
It's a little better, but it's still challenged. I think someone may be trying to reach you. Mr. Lewis, you're muted. I see you raise your finger. Mr. Lewis, you're unmuted. We can hear you now.
Clifton.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes, I do. If I may make a comment, so that we don't confuse the audience out there, we mentioned some dates of Juneteenth and May 20th, and I think we need to keep it in the context of the Civil War. It needs to be made clear that there was a civil war going on, and that unless there were Union troops available in an area, the slave could not be freed. And so until Union troops move into Florida to protect those slaves, the slave stayed in place. Lincoln was assassinated in April 14th, 1865. 1 month later is when the Union troops, led by General McCook and Althemese, eventually came into Tallahassee and accepted the surrender of the state capital of Tallahassee. And then the Emancipation Proclamation was read, that's freeing the slaves in Florida. 1 month later, under the leadership of General Granger, Union troops moved into Texas and did almost precisely the same thing. They read the field order, and we give a lot of attention to these field orders, but if you read them carefully, the field order says, that read by the general, states that pursuant to a proclamation of the executive, that proclamation of the executive was the Emancipation Proclamation. That's what they were enforcing even 2 years after its issuance. The reason why it wasn't fully enforced in 1863 is because there was a war going on. And I just need to point this out. Compare the Emancipation Proclamation to the Declaration of Independence. Independence was declared on July the 4th, but independence didn't have fully come until a decade later when the Constitution was finally ratified, I think in 1789. It took a decade-long revolutionary war to make independence a reality. Yet we celebrate the date that independence was declared on July the 4th, which is fine. Well, Lincoln proclaimed freedom on January 1st, 1863. But it wasn't until 2 years later when the Civil War was finally culminated that freedom eventually came. And so that's the difference between January 1st, 1863 and December 6th, 1865. Either date works for me. I mean, Frederick Douglass called January 1st a momentous decree, a day that should be remembered as if it was 1,000 years, because freedom was proclaimed and the doors opened and the slave began to walk out into an uncertain future. But we know that it was the 13th Amendment that finally made it legal, fully legal. But I just think as we go through this, we recognize that I think in some cases we may have a nationwide audience, because I told my daughters and kids in Maryland and Virginia, and then folks in Louisiana probably listening to this. So we kind of keep on track with, Lincoln's election in 1860, and what happened in the Emancipation Proclamation and the announcement of September 22nd.
Yes, sir.
First and so forth.
Yes, sir. And speaking of those troops, I think we have Mr. Rosier back.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Is it better?
Keep talking.
Okay. Well, that's what the hiccup here. I hope you all can hear me as I come back again. I think I had a few windows open, but am I somewhat clear?
We keep talking. It might be getting better, but it just still seems to be a little gargled. Won't you?
Well, I would ask for 45 minutes like Commissioner Proctor, but I won't take this long. I kind of abbreviate what I have to say. But I was talking about the Emancipation. I mean, here we're talking about Abraham Lincoln. We know that Abraham Lincoln was not a favorite of slaves, but he did not care about equality either. So I just want to kind of say that.
Mr. Rosier, Chase is gonna call you, and then why don't you just call in from your phone so that we can hear you clearly. We'll give you the opportunity to do that. We'll come back to you. We're gonna keep moving on to our next session, and then we'll come back to you, because I really want what you have to say to be heard and be heard clearly. Okay,
Commissioner
yes.
Williams-Cox?
Yes.
Do we have time to ask the panelists that have been speaking a question?
We were hoping to do our questions near the end.
No problem. No problem.
You get an opportunity to have your time in the spotlight.
No problem whatsoever.
We're going to go on to, that was a great conversation, and I like this. I'm envisioning more conversations after this one, because it's really getting juicy in here. And yes. we haven't been fully educated on our history, and so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that later. The third session is preserving the history of emancipation in Florida and nationally. And in this segment, we will chronicle the process that led to the freeing of all enslaved people. And our panelists will include State Representative Geraldine Thompson with the Orlando Wells-Built Museum, Dr. Sandra Thompson with Legacy Communities, and with Florida A&M University. And then we have Chairman Leon Russell, Chairman of the NAACP Board of Directors. And it says that I'm going to say something here. I have a small segment to say. I'll say that at the end if we have time. So why don't we go with Representative Thompson? Unmute yourself.
Thank you, and good evening to everyone. At the very beginning of the session, there was a lot of emphasis on the fact that we have to look at the 13th Amendment through the lens of the Civil War. And that's one of the things that I want to talk about with regard to Florida and where Florida fits in the whole scheme of the Civil War. Now, a lot of people may not know, or if they know, they have overlooked the fact that one of the largest battles during the Civil War was held in Florida. And that occurred in February at Olustee, not far from Tallahassee. We know that the Union soldiers had taken control of Jacksonville, and their objective was to disrupt the supply of food to the Confederacy. So they moved from Jacksonville coming toward Tallahassee, but they collided with Confederate troops in Olustee, near Lake City, right outside of Lake City. And so, and I'm talking about February of 1864. They collided with these troops at Olustee on February 20th. And that was one of the largest battles in the state of Florida during the Civil War. The Union soldiers were outflanked, they were outnumbered, they were losing the war, the battle during the Civil War at Olustee. And the only thing that saved them from being totally annihilated was the fact that the Massachusetts 54th, the infantry of the Massachusetts 54th came into Olustee, as did the 35th U.S. colored troops. And I want to hear Mr. Jarvis when he gets on, but those were the two regiments that saved the Union soldiers from being annihilated at Olustee. You all might have seen the movie Glory, starring Denzel, and you know Morgan Freeman was in it. That a portion of that was filmed at Olustee. And what a lot of people don't know, because the Union soldiers were outmassed, had a lot of casualties, put the wounded on a train. However, the locomotive, the engine, did not work. And so these Black soldiers attached ropes to the engine, and the soldiers, the Black soldiers, pulled that train as if they were the horsepower, and they were the horsepower. They pulled that train until they could get to a place where they could get horses. And so it was the Black soldiers and the horses that pulled the train back into Jacksonville as they retreated. When they reached Jacksonville, some of the wounded went to Fort Clinch. This was a Civil War camp, Fort Clinch in Fernandina Beach. And there was a nurse there who had also served as a spy during the Civil War, who would go into the plantations, a Black woman with her head rag on, her hair wrapped up, and then she'd go back and lead the men out of those plantations to join the U.S. colored troops. And that woman was Harriet Tubman. So when we talk about Florida, we have not claimed, we've not celebrated, we've not elevated the role that the state of Florida had during the Civil War. The state Capitol in Tallahassee was one of the few capitals that was not captured. And it was because of what happened at Olustee when the troops came from Jacksonville and they came to Olustee, where there was a train station with the intent of disrupting the food supply to the Union soldiers, and they could not get to Tallahassee, so they retreated back to Jacksonville. So it's important that we understand that Florida had a prominent role from the very beginning. We're talking about February 20th of 1864 and the battle at Olustee. And except for the role of these Black soldiers who are not really celebrated to the extent that they should be, would have been a total massacre with regard to those Union soldiers who were there. So I've heard Commissioner Proctor and others talk about the 13th Amendment and the loophole. And the loophole does say that slavery is abolished in the United States or any of its territories, except for crimes that you've been convicted of. So even today in 2020, we're talking about really slave labor. When we incarcerate people and we have mass incarceration and these people are not paid, we saw, and you all probably saw some of the people who were incarcerated who were moving bodies after COVID-19 and people died. They were moving bodies into refrigerated trucks because they didn't have space at the morgue. So it's some of the least desirable jobs that our prison population is doing, and they are not getting paid. The focus on economics is very important, and it's still important today. And the reason for mass incarceration is economics. It's free labor. And so that's something that we have to deal with today in 2020, is having unpaid labor through the prison population. And I think once we can address that and attack that, what then is the incentive for mass incarceration? When slavery was in process, everybody was fully employed. We talk about unemployment rate, everybody was fully employed, but they just weren't being paid. So the incentive is to have that free labor pool, that free labor force, and to have people doing the jobs that other people don't want to do and capitalizing on their labor. So the 13th Amendment did abolish slavery except for crimes that a person has been convicted of. And the other part of that is that there have been studies that have documented that for the very same crime, a person of African ancestry gets a stiffer sentence. They pay a higher penalty than a white person for the very same crime. So you do have African Americans disproportionately represented in the prison population because of those disparities. And those are some of the things that we have to address today. But I did want to make sure that we understood Florida's role with regard to the Civil War that brought us to May 20th, brought us to the 13th Amendment being ratified by Congress, and then the states that had withdrawn from the Union. And Florida was one of the, there were 6 initially that withdrew and formed the Confederate States of America. Florida was one of the first. Florida was among those 6. But they required that those Confederate states then ratify the 13th Amendment in order to come back into the Union. And I don't see May 20th at odds with Juneteenth. I think unless all of us are free, or until all of us are free, None of us are free. So if we can celebrate Juneteenth, we can celebrate May 20th, we can celebrate July 4th, we can celebrate Watch Night, because it's all part of a continuum. And I don't think that that those things are at odds. I celebrate all of those. But I wanted to kind of set the framework with regard to Florida's role in the Civil War, and to make sure that people are aware that in 1992, the legislature of the state of Florida made Juneteenth one of the elective holidays that people in the state of Florida may celebrate or may choose to observe and to take off without penalty. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Thompson. And because you mentioned that, you're absolutely right. That is in the Florida in the Florida statute. I do hope that anyone watching this, and I'm asking you to carry it as well, that because it is Florida, that the Emancipation Day also be added into that law, because that happened in Florida. And one of the things that Commissioner Proctor has led at the county was to get Emancipation Day, May 20th, to be a paid holiday for county employees. And I led that effort on the city side, and we both were successful in getting our governments to recognize May 20th as Emancipation Day as a paid holiday for our employees. So I'm hoping that the Florida legislature would not, like you said, not eliminate what is there as far as Juneteenth is concerned, but at least add our holiday for the state of Florida when it actually happened here in the state of Florida. So that I just broke into that station break for that. Let me go to Dr. Thompson, and then Dr. Russell, we're gonna bring you in the back cleanup. Is that okay?
That's fine with me.
All right, Dr. Thompson.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Williams-Cox, for inviting me, and all the other panelists, definitely Mrs. Barnes and Senator Thompson, Commissioner Proctor, Dr. Lewis, Attorney Akbar, everybody. Thank you. I just feel honored to be on this panel, but I'm not a minister, but I felt like preaching. And I felt like preaching as they were talking, because I really thought about, and this ties into the celebration of May 20th here in Florida. I'm 60 at this juncture of my life, and I've always known it as that. My grandmother lived to be 100 years old. May 20th was always a part of her life and celebration. She would always go over to the hills, Hunter Hills Place, and they would beat the drums, and she was dancing up until her 80s. So I think that legacy and the importance of what it meant to our ancestors is something that is worth celebrating and remembering. And as we've begun talking about this in context to Juneteenth, what has become clear, more of colleagues, friends, associates from around the state of Florida, they keep sending these artifacts of what 20th of May was for their ancestors, pictures, obituaries with it, everything that talks about how the 20th of May provided empowerment for their communities and for those they love. So celebrating it is something that I think is critical to keep us tied to what was in our past to go forward. But I do think that this conversation, which is what I felt like making me want to preach, Minister Proctor, was thinking about, is it that we avoid understanding what our role in this country has been, economic, that we have a disaffinity from realizing that that's what it's been. So therefore, we have not developed the skill set or the capacity to begin to change our position based on economics. So if we don't know how to barter effectively or to negotiate effectively based on economic principles, which brings into land and how we've lost so much of it and the power of land, then how do we move to a place of equity? Because when you have your own money, you don't need anybody to tell you that. You have the power to make yourself what you want to be. So I think one of the things that the 20th of May can be as we go forward is bringing in that economic piece, taking the history that all of you have shared and layering that with our economic historical condition, what it is today, and how do we change it? Number one, we need to change that loophole. Number two, how do we begin get our people to understand their economic value in this country? It hadn't changed. From the time we got off the ship to this day, we still have the same economic power. Now we just got to use it for our benefit. So that's how I think we should go forward in celebrating May 20th and forward.
Well, thank you, Dr. Thompson. Hey, make me want to preach. Chairman Luelso, congratulations on coming off of the state convention that was held a few days ago, and that's what we appreciate the work that you're doing. So what say ye, Chairman?
Well, first of all, hello.
Hello.
And thank you for allowing me to be part of this discussion. I won't spend the time that I would normally spend arguing with Bill Proctor. That could be a lengthy dissertation. So what I want to do is I want to remind us that whether Commissioner Williams-Cox, it was your intent or not, we are in effect celebrating December 6th, the date of the ratification of the 13th Amendment. Today's discussion is in fact a celebration
Yes, it is.
of that historical period, and we need to recognize that. Now, we can debate whether or not Lincoln was an abolitionist. I think it's clear that he was not. I think Frederick Douglass and others convinced him that he needed to buy in to some elements of abolition, and therefore, as Mr. Lewis indicated, he was happy to sign the articles or the issue establishing the 13th Amendment, because he had come around to some extent. But I don't think we need to dwell so much on that history. I think from the standpoint of the state of Florida, you ought to recognize what was effective for the state of Florida, which is the fact that, the General Order Number 3 was read in Tallahassee on May 20th. And that is the historical fact, and that ends that debate. Quite frankly, and this is going to sound tacky, most of the folks who are probably listening to this discussion only heard about Juneteenth because it was an opportunity in some communities, particularly in the Western United States, to have an opportunity to have some beer and some barbecue. Now, that's a cold-blooded way of saying it. I think that the celebrations that Althemese and Dr. Thompson talked about were much more serious celebrations. But I think if you're going to recognize in the state of Florida the issue of dates then the reading of General Order Number 3 on May 20th is the date you ought to recognize, because that's who you are. I am a Virginian by birth. Seems to me that General Order Number 3 went into effect the date that Robert E. Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. So I don't want to argue about that. I think that if we are going to recognize what is effectively the end of chattel slavery in the United States, this date, December 6th, 1865, and going forward would be the date of recognition. But I think this overall discussion, and particularly as Representative Thompson, used to be Senator Thompson, and Sandra Thompson were discussing this economic thing, rolled up into the issue of the 10th Amendment, and states' rights and all of that great stuff, should remind all of us, quite frankly, that the preamble said we do this in order to create a more perfect union.
Yes.
What we need to recognize on December 6, 2020 is that we ain't got to the more perfect union yet. Okay? So we need to look at things in that light, and we don't need to buy in to those who believe that the founders were granted the wisdom of God and all wisdom going forward, and therefore when they chiseled into the parchment something that they called the Constitution, that was the last word. They themselves recognized by creating the ability to amend that Constitution that it was a living document. Hence, on December 6, 2020, I will tell you that the discussion that we are having with respect to the issue of slavery, the issue of emancipation, the issue of freedom is all rolled up into what I think ought to be a general discussion of reparation. Word that I haven't heard during this discussion. It's the economic reality of who we are as Black people in these as yet to be United States of America that we need to discuss. Fact is that we need to think about that term reparations in a very, very broad sense. Most folks think of it, Dr. Thompson, in the sense of economics. They think somebody ought to write them a check. I'm going to argue with that premise and say to you, reparations has to be looked at as the issue of resolving the unanswered questions that began in 1619 when the boat landed in this part of the world. We have to answer how we resolve the issue of the impact of chattel slavery, the transatlantic slave trade, Jim Crow, and all of the history of this country. How do we resolve all of those issues? Quite frankly, I don't believe it's going to be in writing everybody a check. And it's not going to be that because, first of all, somebody will say, well, how do you qualify to receive the check? Because everybody who has Black skin is not the product of chattel slavery in the United States. That's something we all have to understand and resolve. The other side of that coin is that we have to, in terms of that discussion, recognize the entire history of the United States, which means that if we're going to do this, we ought to be honest enough to admit that the atrocities, the oppression, extended beyond those who were chattel slaves to those who were the original inhabitants of this particular land. It extends to others who were oppressed and had land taken away from them by the government of the United States based on the fact that the hue of their skin was different. So that means you got to look at Native Americans, you got to look at Asian Pacific Islanders and the consequences of all of that. But more importantly to me, the issue of reparations has to deal with how do we put in place legislation, practices, and regulations that begin to dismantle the impacts of systemic discrimination, systemic racism in this country. It's an economic system, but it's also a system that has to be dealt with in terms of its impact on health, education, criminal justice. Obviously, the fact that the 13th Amendment continued to carry the clause that abided involuntary servitude and that allowed the Jim Crow black codes and other ways of disenfranchisement and the retaining of slavery to exist post 1865 has to be dealt with, because all of that continues to impact our society and particularly our communities today. So in my estimation, we have to have a real discussion about reparation, and we have to broaden the definition, not based on what happened with Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II, but based on the real history of Africans in America. And let me specify that I do understand that Japanese Americans did receive a check. That was because they could be quantified, they could be identified and qualified. We knew who we put in prison camps at the beginning of World War II. It was clear. We had a clear record of who those people were. We knew what the number was, and we knew who to write a check to. That's the end of that subject. The issue of reparations goes far beyond that. The population impacted is far greater, and it's the institutional racism that continues to keep us in the place that Sandra Thompson talked about minutes before. And so if we are going to deal with that, let's deal with it in a broader discussion of that issue. But if you are going to, in Tallahassee, Florida, in a legislative manner, recognize that point at which slaves in this state were technically tacitly freed, May 20th is the answer to that. And you put that in any piece of legislation that you want to, and that would be the historical recognition that it deserves. Juneteenth means nothing if you are a native Floridian, other than your cousins in Texas got to celebrate something that happened in Texas. If you want to celebrate what happened in Florida, then use the Florida dates. If we want to have a broader discussion of how we create a more perfect union, then let's have a discussion that takes into account the institutional racism created by the history of the treatment of people from the diaspora in this nation. That's where I would tell us to go. Thank you. Y'all quiet. What's up?
Okay. We muted everyone so that we could hear you because we were getting some feedback. And I was saying, there you have it from Chairman Russell. Senator Thompson and Dr. Thompson, do you all have anything you want to add to what Chairman Russell said? You're muted as well.
I just unmuted.
Okay.
I think the conversation regarding reparations is a conversation that we have to have, and we have to redefine reparations. And we had a proposal before the legislature in this last session to give reparations for the descendants of people in Ocoee whose ancestors were killed on election day in 1920. Their land now is owned by some of the people who were the perpetrators. The land never legally transferred to those individuals, so we know that. However, when the legislation was put forward, Senator Randolph Bracy, who represents a portion of Ocoee, I represent a portion of Ocoee, the other legislators indicated that reparations was not something that right now they could support. So that bill morphed into requiring that the history of the massacre in Ocoee be taught in all 67 counties in Florida's public schools. No money, but making sure that it's part of the curriculum. So reparations is very difficult. I think the state of Florida, when we recognize what happened in Rosewood, and Florida stepped up and created scholarships for the descendants of those people who were massacred in Rosewood. That's one approach to help people understand what reparations is all about, giving people access to education, upward mobility, etc. And we've seen that scholarships work. If you look at Harris Rosen, who owns the Rosen Hotels in Orange County, he adopted a Black community, Tangelo Park, and guaranteed that any child who graduated from high school and lived in Tangelo would get a scholarship, a full ride. And attendance went up, completion of high school went up, enrollment in college went up, just the psychological impact that it had for parents then and for the students, that you are guaranteed a scholarship. That's something that we can do in terms of reparation. We can also do something similar to the GI Bill with regard to home ownership, looking at African Americans who came through the system of chattel slavery and promoting home ownership and giving funds for deposits. Those kinds of things I think people can understand. But until we, the people, get a really good grip on what reparations is all about, because some people do think that they're going to get a check. I mean, they never got the 40 acres and the mule, but they're thinking now that they might get a check. But we're talking about long-term ways to assist people to move up and to leave behind the vestiges of slavery, because we're still dealing with a lot of the vestiges. So I wanted to just validate what Chairman Russell has said. Reparations is a conversation that needs to be had, but we've got to decide and we've got to define what reparations means.
Could I piggyback just for a minute on Jerry? And Geraldine and I have known each other forever, so I call it Jerry. I'm sorry. At this point in time, I think the Ocoee situation needs to be treated as Rosewood was treated, and set aside for a minute the issue of the scholarships for descendants. The issue at Rosewood was actually a claims bill, and so the relatives, the descendants of those people in Ocoee deserve a claims bill. Now, could we get it through the Florida legislature at this point? I have my doubts. It's a far different legislature than the one we got the Rosewood Claims Bill through. But the repairing what happened in Ocoee is, in fact, something that can be tangibly identified by family in that community. So I think a claims bill would be the appropriate way to deal with that. The issue of reparations, to me, is far greater. Sorry, Sandra.
That's okay. That's okay. This is all very exciting. I think So the way that I'm seeing this and taking us back to the celebration day, that we are framing this as how do we, as I said, take the celebration of eradication of slavery legislatively into the 21st century, and what does that mean for us? And the way that it's coming together for me is that this base knowledge is not base knowledge that I got in K through 12 in Leon County. So therefore, we do not have an empowered constituency who's going to then push and vote until we have the legislatures that we need to pass such as this. And so the thing that I'm thinking, and so to another point to this is that I know we are so much more massive than when the Japanese were put in camps during World War II. But through my work with legacy communities and those communities that evolved on and from plantation in those 7 largest plantation counties in Florida, not negating the other counties that also had slave plantations and slave plantations. But I can trace my people back to 3 areas in Leon County. Willani, off of Centerville, Miccosukee, and Bear Hill, right here where I live, Bear Hill community. So I do not, we can trace, they have records of every enslaved person in this state and in this country. And then we are able to use DNA, which is only $99. What I'm basically saying is, as we educate and empower, we need to begin to not allow people to negate our numbers to say we don't deserve justice and equity. And I think 20th of May could be the framework that we go back and start educating us adults and then those kids who are coming through so that they will be the ones who will continue this movement forward. But I just feel so overwhelmed and so thankful for this knowledge that you all have shared with me to really understand Florida in a whole different context. And so my comments are thank you.
Well, thank you for being a part. This has been great conversation. I'm overwhelmed as well, and I'm just sopping it up. I love it. I love learning. I know that Mr. Rosier is back, and we want to give him an opportunity before we go to our final segment. I want to hear what he has to say. It is very important in the context of what we're discussing. Mr. Rosier, you're going to take yourself off mute, and we're going to give this thing another go. You must have something awesome to share with us that somebody out there don't want to hear. So give it to them anyway.
We all need to hear. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Sorry about the problems we were having there. First, I want to say something that can capture all that we're talking about, and that's the fact that our history is not objective. Our history is definitive. It's a definitive subject, and our history is based on fact. The issue that I have, I guess I'll go and then I'll talk about the USCT with Juneteenth. Juneteenth was with General Order Number 3 that was read by General Granger as he rode into Galveston, Texas. I haven't seen yet where they wrote read the Emancipation Proclamation, but he read General Order Number 3, something that was specific for Texas. I know Texas is a big state, but it doesn't reach the Atlantic to the Pacific. So June 16th was Juneteenth for Texas. And the other thing I have a problem with that is it says that all slaves were free on that date. That is not true, June 19th. It was not true. There were still slaves being held in Delaware, in Kentucky, and parts of Oklahoma. So how can you say that all slaves were free on the 19th of June? It was not. It's not a fact. And we should all know that and hinge on that not being a fact and not move forward with doing things. But that's hearsay now. But that's the other problem I have with that, factual things that happen. I want to thank Commissioner Cox with the city and Commissioner Proctor for your work and getting the holidays May 20th, which is Florida, like Dr. Russell was saying. That's what we need to concentrate. I think we all have said that we need to concentrate on May 20th being a holiday for the state of Florida because that's where it came about. But let me talk a little bit about the USCT soldiers who I represent. I'm the president and founder of the 2nd Infantry Regiment, United States Colored Troops Living History Association, where our mission is to preserve, protect, promote, educate, and interpret the accomplishments of the many African Americans that fought during the Civil War. Now, the Emancipation Proclamation transformed the Civil War. I think it's been said before that the Emancipation was a war document. You had to have that written because there was an adversary. The adversary to the Union was the Confederacy. So it became a war document. But it also brought about the General Order Number 143 on May 22nd in 1863, which established the Bureau of Colored Troops, allowing the formation of the United States Colored Troops. By the end of the Civil War, over 209,140 served the United States and the Union. By the end of the Civil War, the Colored Troops made up 1/10, what they were called, Colored Troops. But I heard Dr. Thompson, Senator Thompson, talk about the Battle of Olustee. It was one of the major battles. It's the largest battle here in the state of Florida. But there was a battle, the Battle of Natural Bridge, right here, 8 miles south of the capital here in Tallahassee, where the group that we represent actually fought that battle. What I like to say is we put a real face on the battlefield. Right, Commissioner Proctor? We've talked about it many times. That's in your district. But, yeah, that's important. And the story she said about Olustee was true. We go to different areas and doing battlefield reenactments, but we don't go just to put on a show. We go put real faces on the battlefield is what I call it. And Battle of Natural Bridge was a real face because the unit we represent actually fought at that battle. 21 lives were lost at that battle. We go to different areas, and if I may say, Sandersville, Georgia, was one where Sherman rode his way over to Savannah. Sandersville was a place where African Americans actually did fight on the battlefield, but this is a place that has been asking us to come up there. We did go last year, and going up there, I rode up 75 many times, and I saw the place Hawkinsville. I just found out several years ago in the family that was where my family was from, on John Rosier Plantation. My great-great-great-grandmother, Jane Rosier, and her 5 boys moved to Wakulla, according to the census in 1859. And riding to Sandersville, after you get off 75, there's about 5 or 6 miles of nothing but cotton fields. And my mind went back to say my ancestors were on these cotton fields back during slavery. So slavery, we must remember, slavery didn't die by natural death. Slavery died because of the sacrifice of many, the many African Americans that fought during the Civil War. And we have to remember that. They didn't die by natural death. It didn't die by natural death. By the end of the Civil War, like I said, over 200,000. They had a lot to do with the Florida also. When the Emancipation Proclamation was read by General McCook, as he came into Tallahassee with his 300 men, and at our house where they read the Emancipation Proclamation, a reenactment that we do, a real reenactment. He read it on the steps. The Union troops went out to plantations and countrysides to inform the slaves that they were free. May 20th. May 20th. The date that we should remember and quantify here in the state of Florida. The 2nd and the 99th Regiment was another United States Colored Troop regiment that fought at the Battle of Natural Bridge, ushered in martial law here in Tallahassee, and from Tallahassee over to Jacksonville. The USCT assisted the Freedmen's Society effort. So the United States Colored Troop played a very important part of the reading of the Emancipation and ushering in the end of slavery here. We honor our USCT soldiers at U.S. Old City Cemetery, one of the events that we do. There are many events on May 20th where we have over 31 graves of Union soldiers with USCT soldiers buried there also. Our unit, the 2nd Infantry Regiment USCT, along with the John Gilmore Riley Museum of African American History, commemorate them each year on May 20th. This has been done since 1871, been carried out, and we're carrying on that tradition. We have an Emancipation and Abolition Ball where we celebrate. At the end of slavery, there was a celebration, so we celebrate, and we do things of that nature there. So this is very important to USCT, the soldiers that we represent, and I am elated that I'm on this conversation. I had a lot more to say, and I know that we may be pushing for time, but we do need to remember. And if I may, I don't know how much time I have left, Commissioner, on my...
Well, Vic, go ahead and finish your thoughts.
Okay. No, there was a poem that, if I may say, that was written by Paul Lawrence Dunbar, and it talked about the United States Colored Troop. And if I may, it kind of captures what I would like to say in a whole lot of different segments, but it talks about it. And it says, if the musical minds are tense and my feeble voice was strong, if my tongue were faint to measure, I'd sing a stirring song. I'd sing a song heroic of the noble sons of Ham, those gallant colored soldiers who fought for our consent. In the early days, you scorned them with the many flipping flowers, said these battles the white man and the whites would fight them out. Up the hills you fought and you faltered, in the vales you strove in your bed, till your ears they heard the thunder of the foes of both red. When the stress fell upon the nation and the flag was drooping low, you said, to dust pollute the bounty, the nation shouted, no, no. But war and its established triumph spread abroad its funeral pall. You called on the colored soldier, and they answered to your call. Like hounds unleashed and eager, as the lifeblood of the prey, sprang them forth and bore them bravely in the thickest of the fray. Where the fight was the hottest, and the bullets fastest fell, they pressed the branch and feelers at the very mouth of hell. How they rallied to the standard to uphold it by their might. None were braver in their labor, none were stronger in the fight. From the brazen breach of Wagner to the plains of Olusty, they were foremost in the fight of the battles to be free. And at Fort Pillow, God have mercy on the deeds committed there, to the souls of those soldiers sent you without a prayer. That the fullness of thy pity in their hearts were spirits way of those gallant colored soldiers who failed fighting that day. Yes, the blacks, they've earned their freedom, and they've earned it dearly too, for the lifeblood of the thousands that these southern fields do. From the depths of their bondage to the depths of Savior's night, their muskets flashed the dawning, and they fought their way to life. They were comrades and then brothers, are they more or less today? They were citizens and soldiers when rebellion raised its head. Those traits that made them worthy then, know those virtues, they're not dead. They slept, they marched, they suffered, neath the same dark skies as you. They faced a fierce former, but remained brave and true. Their deeds shall find their record in the registry of flame. Their blood has cleansed completely every blot of slavery's chain. So all honor and all glory to those noble sons of Ham we talked about, those gallant colored soldiers who fought for the sand. You know, that's why we cannot, we will not, we shall not, will never forget these battlefields that we talked about that were saturated with the blood of African American manhood that got us to the point where we're talking about the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment also. So I just wanted to say that with my time being short, to kind of culminate talking about the group that I represent, and we do it with that.
Thank you. Thank you. That was so important. We did not want to go on without you having to provide that contribution. That is awesome. Awesome. We're going to go into our last segment. The final panel, New Day of Freedom, is what this section is being called. And it's going to highlight the commemorations surrounding emancipation. Our panelists will discuss the historical distinctions between January 1st, 1863, when some of the enslaved people were freed, and December 6, 1865, when all enslaved people were emancipated. Our panelists for this group will include our president-elect of the local chapter of the NAACP, Attorney Mataki Akbar, and Leon County, I already mentioned he's Leon County NAACP, and Commissioner Bill Proctor. So we got to me, I think that whoever paired this up, they looked at old school, new school. So y'all go at it. You know, this is a little versus thing, I guess, what the thing is going on here. So Mataki?
Hey, good afternoon. And I guess the good thing in being last in this panel is that the majority of the information has already been shared. So I think a lot of the discussion has been about the difference between, you know, the announcement of the emancipation back December 6th, which we're celebrating now, 1863, and I guess like the sequence of the commemorations of emancipation. And I think the reason why there's so much confusion as to when we should celebrate our freedom is because we still not free. And so we're trying to figure out how to celebrate something that is not even an accomplishment quite yet. And what we saw last year, last summer, well, I guess like this summer, that this whole explosion and people throughout the country really wanted to celebrate Juneteenth. And that just so happened to be because everything kind of exploded after May 20th. So we needed something to celebrate. So everybody said, okay, let's celebrate Juneteenth as the celebration of Emancipation Day. But what happened was, like, everybody in Florida, like especially, you know, my contemporaries and people my age, they were kind of confused because when we grew up, I'm sure Commissioner Proctor can speak to this, May 20th was the day. So what I remember, you know, from as early as I can remember, you know, 5, 6 years old, going up to Walker Ford Community Center, and it being a huge celebration. There are vendors, there's food, there's entertainment. And we celebrated Emancipation Day on May 20th or whatever Saturday it was around May 20th. But I also remember not really realizing what Emancipation Day was. And so I think it's a good thing now that we're kind of, it all comes back around. It's the idea of Sankofa kind of looking back. Now, in these days that we're trying to, I guess, like prove our not really prove our blackness, but bring awareness to our blackness and bring awareness to who we are as African Americans, not just as Africans, but as African Americans, we can now define it how we want to define it. And so I think that May 20th, whether it's May 20th, whether it's December 6th, whether it's January 1st, like somebody said before, I think the important part of it is to show where we came from, the route that it took for us to get here, and that is more than just entertainment on a specific day, but it's education of who we are. Because the more that we educated about who we are and what it took for us to get to where we are at this point, that's the prouder we'll be of ourselves. And it's not convincing white folks. So Juneteenth over the summer, I think we were like trying to convince white folks that, hey, we're important, we have a history, and let's recognize Juneteenth as being a part of that history. But I think that what we need to do is focus on educating our children, educating ourselves, because we can make it a day. That's easy to make it a day. But when we lose the importance of that day, then we lose the importance of it. Then it's no longer about our freedom and who we are and what it took and where we've been. And then it just becomes just a particular day. So as we, and I applaud you, Commissioner Cox, and I applaud you, Commissioner Proctor, for making it a paid day off. But it doesn't need to stop at just a paid day off. It needs to be taught in the schools. It needs to be a huge recognition of our freedom. And our freedom from what? Our freedom from slavery, our freedom from shackles, our freedom from being less than human beings, our freedom from used as shadow, our freedom from all of those things. That's what we need to celebrate, not just a day. So, and again, like I take that, so going back to like the topic of this part of it, I remember not knowing what I was celebrating. I remember not necessarily appreciating why I was going to Walker Ford, why I was getting dressed up in a new outfit. And so with that memory in mind, I don't want my son to have a day off from school just to have a day off from school. I want him to remember and know what this is all about. So this new day of freedom, I think this new day of freedom really needs to recognize what we've been through as Black people, and also recognize where we can go because of what we've been through as Black people. Commissioner Proctor.
Thank you. Chairman Leon Russell always starting stuff, and ain't nobody said nothing about reparation. That's just like him to show up and show out. So since, you know, Madam Moderator, you let him go all off the script and whatnot, precedent has been established.
Yeah, you don't want to fight with me, Bill Proctor.
No, I don't want to. I got the white flag right here. I don't want to do that. I just want that you done established precedent and went way off topic somewhere. Me too. That's what I want to do. So I was looking at this thing, and as we're looking, panel, I believe that these words should strike up and raise something in all of you as the U.S. Census is being taken, and as we understand that Florida by 2030 will not have a racial majority. And he said unto his people, behold, the people, children of Israel, are more and mightier than we. Come on and let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto enemies and fight against us. And so let's get them up out the land. So therefore they set over them taskmasters to afflict them burdens. They built for Pharaoh treasure cities and all of that. I think that the browning of America looms as a tremendous issue. And in terms of what we do to celebrate the freedom this section is dealing with, I think that is not so much the celebration of the freedom as uplifting the issue of the impact, psychological and otherwise, for the browning of America. God knows that I'm going to leave y'all at 7 o'clock because there's a preacher from Georgia that I want to see on a debate tonight. I'll be gone by then, Madam Commissioner.
We will all be gone by then.
Okay, that's good. But this new date of freedom certainly is about our capacity to understand that, number one, browning of America. Number two, we must understand that power never concedes anything without a demand. It never has. Frederick Douglass says it never will. In terms of the scope of the economics, you're absolutely right, Dr. Thompson. We had no value in 1619 except our hands, and in 2020, our value still, we have not gotten paid. We have not gotten what we done put in. Sweat equity does not transfer into wealth. Something got to be did about that right there. And then I think it's very important, friends, that we also call out on this celebration the mass incarceration, that we call out the pandemic and the impacts of dying and the increasing numbers and the phenomenal exponential rate in which African Americans are inflicted by COVID-19. And then Attorney Akbar is more than right. Ooh, he's so right, because he said that education, and when I tell you about reading deficiencies, Commissioner, you know that we got 70% of the kids in Title I schools that don't read the grade average. If our children are gonna grow up in 21st century and all they can do is put an X down, hell, that's all you could do 150 years ago, is sign your name with an X. And we're going back to Xing because folk are not reading. Literacy must be. And Mr. Chairman, I don't know if we're gonna agree on this. You've seen the data. You know what segregation produced. You know the quality of being people who could do the 3 hours read, write, arithmetic, folk who had some sense, pulled their pants up, wouldn't cuss in front of grown folk. You know what the segregated school, the quality of the individual that came out, I'm almost on the verge of saying we need to look at the resegregation of public schools, at least from first grade to kindergarten up to about 7th or 8th grade. Something is wrong when this many children and the excellence with which their minds and what God put in them for creativity, and that we're blowing this this human capital, this mental, this spiritual, this creative genius is not being defined in school systems all across the state of Florida. And when we have in Florida some 60% of Black boys don't graduate high school with a high school diploma, something is wrong. So I'm not all that up on and could say about what do we do to the new celebration and all that, Commissioner Cox. I just simply say that this new freedom, I'm not sure if this freedom is new. I think that the segregated school produced a stronger product. I think that mass incarceration and that clause over here said that slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime. And God knows every little thing is being a crime. We got officers at the schoolhouse locking up children. That pipeline ain't play. That pipeline is real. We got folks sitting out there in the jail, been waiting for 4 years to get a trial, to get into the court. Anything, no movement, stagnated, constipation in the judicial system. There are problems. And I think that the creative effort of which the Black Lives Matter and other voices, we have got to lift the best of those and explode. I think that we are too passive. I think that we are too calm relative to the stark problems and adverse issues are inflicted and afflicted upon us. We are way marginally, way below what our voices of resistance ought to be. And if you, all of y'all got jobs, all of y'all got houses, all of y'all got this, that, all the goodies and da. But I'm telling y'all, we ain't free when the majority of us ain't got the basic stuff like food, clothing, and shelter worked out tonight. I thank you, Madam Commissioner. I've enjoyed you all. I will be quiet, and I appreciate so much all of my friends, all of you, my respect, my love for all that you do. And I apologize for all that I did wrong in my statements going off the road, trying to be like Mr. Leon Russell.
Why you blame me?
No need to apologize. You are the clear voice. So we have grown to appreciate. I just want to offer to Attorney Akbar, your fellow baby rattler, to see if he wants to come back and anything you said, give you an opportunity to say something in response to Commissioner Proctor.
No, I mean, again, my position here is a good position because I can absorb it all, take it all in, and pretty much not have to repeat anything. So I appreciate being in this position and honored to be a part of this panel with great. I learned a lot today, so I'm honored to be a part of this.
I think we probably have our youngest panelist with us. Tell him your son's name and how old is he?
This is my dude, and he's 3.
And there's nowhere that his daddy goes that he is not welcome. So I appreciate that, being a real dad. This has been a Mr. Lewis is waving. He's not waving the white flag. He's waving. Go ahead, Mr. Lewis.
Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
I just want to add, following up on what Representative Thompson said about Florida goes through the Civil War. I just want to mention, to get it on the record before we leave, to give us an idea of Florida's roots, its history. Florida was the 3rd state to leave the Union, following South Carolina and Mississippi. Florida did not join the Confederacy. Florida formed the Confederacy. Mississippi and North Carolina, Virginia and North Carolina eventually joined the Confederacy. But Florida was one of the founders. And it had only been in the Union for about 15 years. Right. So it came in the Union kicking and screaming about wanting to leave. The other thing I want to mention is that on April 1st, when word reached Tallahassee that the Union troops were about to capture the capital, that they were coming in a large Union troops, Jarvis, were United States colored troops. The governor at that time, Governor John Milton, went to the state legislature and announced that death was preferable to reunion. Not long after that, the governor drove to his farm in Mariana, and his body was found with a bullet hole in his head. You can Google that. So the governor of Florida committed suicide rather than reunifying and releasing those slaves. So Florida has been a very conservative state for a very, very long time. You're absolutely right, Representative Thompson. We need to keep the focus on, as far as Florida is concerned, the day is May 20th for Florida. And so far as a national holiday is concerned, Chairman Russell, you're absolutely right. It should be December the 6th. Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed all of the discussion. Thank you.
No, thank you all. Thank you all. We're now going into our question and answer session. I saw Mr. Rosier raise his hand, and we're going to now open it up for questions from anyone who wants to send us something in chat. Mr. Rosier.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one last thing there. I wanted to go ahead and preach my sermon here today. When we think about 1619 in Jamestown, when the first slaves were brought to the United States, till 1865, that was a 246-year wilderness experience for African Americans during that time. And just a history in Mississippi, the state of Mississippi did not ratify the 13th Amendment till 2013.
That's right.
We can look that up.
That's right.
There's just so much. And we could have had this for all day, because there's just so much to talk about. And, Juneteenth, Texas was the last of the 7 states in rebellion to come back to the Union. Delaware, Kentucky did not secede from the Union, so they weren't in that history phrase that we got there. So we have to be careful about a catchphrase, Juneteenth. We need to look at May 20th. I'm all for it as a direct, not objective, but pure date that May 20th was the date that slaves were freed in the state of Florida. And there's a holiday or whatever it may be, not have to be a paid holiday, just an observance in our schools and to our young folks to let them know the real history there. Thank you. It's been a pleasure being a part of this panel.
All right, great. Ms. Barnes, unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm on. Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming to be a part of the forum. And I am just happy to hear Attorney Mataki Akbar and look forward to a very fruitful administration that's coming up for you. And the fact that you are focusing on the importance of knowing why we do things. History is what it is. It cannot be rewritten. Now, we might go off here on a tangent if we choose, but that record will stand. But the only thing is, if we permit the record to be presented inaccurately, then the pen tends to write and move on. So at some time, we have to stop, pause, and educate. I've shared with Commissioner Cox during the protests, well, we called them marches, freedom marches. Sometimes the word protest to me tends to engender some violence or some action. That's whatever. But when the students were marching, the young people, it concerned me often. I said, do they really have the root reason why they're marching and whose name should be on the flag as being unfairly treated or what have you? And sometimes it goes back to really knowing the real education of why we are doing something. And so that's the value of having museums like Senator Thompson and the Riley and Clifton and L.B. Brown. We want to research and do what we can, and then make sure that our Florida statute, our legal documents are accurately presented.
Absolutely. One of the things that I wanted to add, and Senator Thompson filed a bill last year to try to fortify this, is that 25 years ago, a law came, well, there was a law on the books, it still is on the books, as a matter of fact, Florida Statute 1003.42 H, where African American history is supposed to be taught in the 67 school districts. 25 years later, it's being taught in very few school districts. And so Senator Thompson filed a bill last year to go after the people who were not allowed, who were not advocating, I guess, for it to be taught in their school district. It didn't pass, but that doesn't mean that we stop. We must get our children educated. And had I not educated myself more, I'm not as educated as many of you. In 5th grade, when I was in 5th grade in Gaston County in Quincy, my elementary school teacher, we had, at that time, Black History was 1 week. She shared with our class that Malcolm X was a criminal because he was in jail. You know, he went to jail. Had my education stopped there on Malcolm X, I would still be walking around here thinking that Malcolm X, you know, he was nobody of importance because of what his past was. But the story continues. So we've got to teach our children. If nobody else teach our children, we've got to teach them. And if you can't teach the children, teach the grandchildren, because we've got to keep our history going. And we've got to we got to make sure that these laws that are on the books are being enforced. They're on the books for a reason. Now there are other groups. Their law is on the book that they must do these educations. There's something on there about the Holocaust. That's being taught. But we've got to make sure that African American history is also being taught, because it goes to what Attorney Akbar says. We got to educate, not just have a party. We got to educate, know what we're celebrating, understand why it should be celebrated. And in that vein, I do have a question that came into our Q&A section, and this is from Sandra Rooks, the Executive Director of Pinellas County African American History Museum. And her question was, in her conversation with many African Americans from areas of Florida other than northern Florida, they have no knowledge of the significance of May 20th. What accounts for this? Could it have something to do with proximity or difficulty in traveling? Who wants to speak on that?
They don't know because they haven't been taught. Quite simple. They don't know because we haven't required it to be taught. We haven't passed it down. I think probably as you come down the peninsula, I think the prominence of the date not as important and not as well known. So it's one of those things that we have to ensure gets done.
And I think that's tied, as we talk about history, when the migration of African Americans from the southern states. In Florida, they went south, DC, Jacksonville, and I think a few of the northern states, but not as much as other states. And so what happens is, once we are separated from our home place, then it's like when we own land in the South, but we haven't ever stepped foot on the land, or we haven't ever visited, we have no connection to it. And so in the same way, I would think that as people migrated away, and think about how many generations since their original ancestors left this northern part of Florida, it's been a while. And so, unfortunately, the family ties or the family recollection of history has not transmitted to all the generations for whatever reason. So that is one of the reasons that what we're talking about, the education and the history, is critical. Because those young people, they're going to be what takes us into the future, because we won't necessarily be here, but we sure need them to be educated to make sure that they keep our people on the right track.
Thank
And
you.
I want to add to what you said, Commissioner, about the law being on the books and that the history of the Holocaust is being taught because people from the Jewish community demand that it is taught. And you all probably saw what happened when the principal in Palm Beach was contacted by a parent and asked, how are you teaching the history of the Holocaust? And his response was, we have material, we have learning activities, but we don't mandate it because I'm not sure the Holocaust really occurred. That was his response. So he was fired. The community was up in arms, contacting legislators, contacting the Commissioner of Education. Those of us on this panel are sensitive to the needs of our children, understanding who they are and where they come from. But how many people, just by and large, have been up in arms about this law that's been on the books for 25 years? How many people have demanded that the instruction occurred? So the bill that I filed last session would have withheld the salary of the superintendent in any of the 67 counties that cannot demonstrate and prove that this instruction is taking place. And it did not pass. And so I've been a voice in the wilderness for a long time. So we need more people, more voices saying that this is important and we demand that this law be implemented. It's been on the books and it hasn't been done. If you withhold that salary from the superintendent, you talk about trickle down, the superintendent is going to make sure that the principals and the academic directors or whatever, that they get it right because they don't want to lose their salary. So we're going to have to be more proactive in making sure that our children are educated regarding their history.
Can I tie something to that? When we were talking about economics. So if, we're not even talking about the rest of the United States, let's just talk about Florida. If we truly understood the economic value we have today, even though we're not on the fields, we wouldn't understand that the power of our voice could have backed Representative Thompson in getting past what she needed passed. But we don't understand our value. We don't understand the economic. Anything that Black folk come up with in this country, it is adopted and codified in social interactions, in athletics, and movies, in everything that we do. So I think it is important that we begin not only to teach our history, but to teach the economic power we have. Because when we understand that, then we will hold people feet to the fire.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, one other question, not really a question, but a statement. Some folks want to know, when are we going to do part 2 of this? In other words, where do we go from here? And thank you, Chairman Russell, for recognizing that this is a celebration and commemoration of Freedom Day for all enslaved, except for those who were found to have done some criminal activity. But where do we go from here? We can celebrate. We need to educate. We need economics. Where do reparations was discussed? Where do we go from here?
I think that we need to have a discussion with the Black Caucus of our state legislature to start talking about these kinds of issues. I think that's an important part. I think that this ought to be, we ought to develop a legislative agenda that speaks to these things and start to disseminate that statewide as far as we can. I think, everything starts with one thing, and you started this one, so pretty good committee, it seems to me, to start talking about how we do this in the legislative arena. Geraldine can get at the door.
I would like to add, if I may.
One thing we need to probably think about also, and going back to Ms. Brooks' question in Clearwater, we have to be careful about how we say African American history, because African American history is American history. It should always be and not separate. We're part of the American experience. The reason I'm thinking maybe she had the people down south or Central Florida or other places hadn't heard Emancipation Day, May 20th, because Juneteenth kind of capitalizes that time down there, the frame, catchphrase or whatever. Because I've done events in Pompano Beach. They had a Juneteenth event that was correlated with the Sweet Potato Festival, but they talked about Juneteenth. I worked with Senator Thompson, and I applaud you for the work that you're doing. With Harriet Tubman saber and pistol you had, and bringing up Mr. Sergeant John Corbin, one of the few remaining men of the Triple Nickel, the 1st Airborne Unit, to the floor of the Senate and recognizing him. And it's going to take people like you to do those things. But we need to be a little careful with the catchphrases. Ms. Barnes and I have been working, and with Commissioner Cox, about May 20th. It may not be a catchphrase, but it's definitive history. So,
one thing one thing I do want to interject when we say, where do we start? First of all, back to the record. In Florida statute, we have that the slaves in Florida, whereas on June 19th, the slaves in Florida were freed. We need to begin with our base documents, Attorney Akbar, to make sure that we have it in the record
Correctly.
And then there is a chronology that's been done. Mayor May, Beth Lasivita, some of the others have put it together. It's only about 8 pages, but it gives the entire flow, chronology, timeline of how everything happened. If we do that and then get with the Multicultural Task Force, which has been in place for over 20-some years, and get that organization, entity, a little more active in advocacy with the legislature. And when Commissioner Cox and I, as you remember, when we talked with some of the caucus folk last session, we had some to say, we didn't know about that history. So there is some steps.
There is work to be done. There's work to be done. Mr. Barber? What say ye? I'm reading your expression. You sound like you got something to say.
No, I'm just being educated right now. It was great listening to everyone speak. I did want to chime in and say that apparently in South Florida is a fairly young area. 1896 is the city of Miami Corporation. And then a lot of people in South Florida are transients, as Dr. Hobbs would say a long time ago. Ted Hobbs would say over and over again that we're transients. So I think for us down here, many people begin to latch on to what they were able to latch on. So a lot of people don't read their history; they just react off of whatever anyone said. So that's why there's been a joint pool, I can say, for the Juneteenth, and I respect the panelists that said it. Just celebrate all of them. But it's just a matter of education, a matter of letting them know about the May 20th. I learned about the May 20th through Mrs. Barnes and the FAPAN, and bringing us to Tallahassee to learn that. I thought it was very enriching, very educational, informative. So that which is what really changed my perception of when Florida slavery ended. And so it's just about education. So thank you to everyone that allowed me to be here to learn from all of you. And I just look forward to any other invitations that I receive. Thank you.
All right. I think we've heard Mr. Lewis. You're on mute. Unmute yourself.
In connection with the question, it's not always formal education in the schools. we as senior citizens need to do a better job of passing on to our children and grandchildren these customs and traditions. Right now, as we speak, many Black churches are planning their watch night service, even though it may be online. And yet, I dare say most Black church members, as well as pastors, probably have very little idea of how watch night affects emancipation. So in a very informal sense, we need to encourage ourselves to pass this information on to our children and grandchildren. We have a role to play in this. Thank you.
Absolutely. As we're saying, as we wrap up, we have work to do. Let me just check, see if there's any other questions. We have work to do, and Ms. Barnes gave us several things that we need to do, the chronology and making sure that the information is there. Senator Thompson gave us what we need to do. We need to be more proactive in making sure that our legislative, and Chairman Russell said as well, making sure that our legislative agenda is recognized and understood by those who represent us, as well as we've got to teach our own, as Mr. Lewis was saying, we've got to share this information, pass it on with our own folks. So as well, let me see, I think there's another question here. Jacoby Pittman was the one who submitted the question regarding doing another session like this. And Gloria Anderson, everybody knows Gloria Anderson locally. She's a local historian. She says we need to create a commission on slavery in Leon County and Florida. So that was a recommendation or suggestion that she made. I will offer in the interim, I know everybody's busy, but we can't be too busy to educate and pass on our own history. I think that we all need to do what we can do individually and collectively to not let this conversation end when we end here today. If we don't do anything else but go to our local school districts and speak to those school board members and those superintendents about the importance of having this education in our school system. Also, taking the lead from the capital county and the capital city with Commissioner Proctor and myself and our colleagues who saw the merit in recognizing Emancipation Day in Florida as May 20th as a paid holiday for their employees. We're hoping that this will lead the way. I know Miami-Dade did something a little bit differently, but as Mr. Barber said, that may have been because there are some transients there that don't maybe not recognize or understand the history. But let's do that. Let's let it flow from this conversation, from this place, that it goes throughout Florida, so we can get Florida on the same sheet of music. We can't do anything with Texas or Virginia or anybody else if we're not together. Now, what Texas did, I see Ms. Barnes, I'm coming to you. What Texas did was they did formalize Juneteenth, and so I'll just share with you that I knew nothing about Juneteenth until recent years, because what I learned was what was passed on to me from my family of the celebration of the 20th of May. So if we can just get Bartow and Orlando and Miami and wherever you are, Chairman Russell, if we can just get others to agree that we need to do what Leon County has done, and at least let's recognize that. Ms. Barnes.
Okay, I just wanted to mention, this is important, that it is moving. Jacoby Pittman, who just sent in a question, and she said she sent one other one, but Monday, she has a group organized, and we are doing a meeting at 9 a.m. because she's bringing it to her community, Duval County, Jacksonville, that we need to go back. The founder of the Claire White Mission and Museum had this commemoration going after she passed many years ago, passed it to a younger generation, and it's tapered off. But Jacoby Pittman, who is the executive director of the Eartha White Mission and Museum, is having a meeting on Monday at 9 a.m. virtual to begin the discussion for how Duval County needs to be accurate and begin to teach the history we are talking about.
And in Duval County, Senator Thompson knows this because I've been communicating with him. Ms. Barnes, you know it too. Representative Tracy Davis is also working, has also been a part of the conversation about teaching African American history, teaching Mr. Rosier American history. American history is being taught. We need to have the African piece included. So you're right. We've just been missing that African piece, so we need the rest of the story. Also, our local young historian, who I've been very impressed with through the years, has added something here. Delatri Hollinger, who has said that I'm working on several his pieces in the area on recognizing people in history. He said we have our next steps. What is our action plan and timeline for moving forward? I love those kinds of questions from young people, because young people got energy, right? Mataki, y'all got energy. We got wisdom. So when you put wisdom and energy together, we can make some things happen. But so what is the action plan? And I know that's a rhetorical question. He didn't expect us to have one already designed tonight, but we do need to put some things into action. The Florida Legislature committee meetings begin January. Senator Thompson, what are the dates? You're on mute.
Committee meetings begin January 11th.
Okay.
And those of us in the House have not yet gotten notification of what committees we have been assigned to.
So in context to action plan, I think you, Commissioner Williams-Cox, kind of listed out two things already, and that was we need to engage more around the legislative agenda, supporting Representative Thompson as she works and getting with the Black Caucus. The other piece was working with, I think Mrs. Barnes mentioned a group that's already in existence, helping them work on making sure that this education is addressed. And I know I'm not getting all exactly how you said it, but I think the third thing is you held a workshop early in the year that I participated on. Mrs. Barnes is a keynote, and what we did, we talked about Florida history, African American history over a period of years. Mm-hmm. And so what we have to understand and teach is that South Florida was really unworkable at one point. It was just a lot of jungle, and please don't take me in the wrong way, but compared to North Florida, North Florida was the last stop for fertile land as it relates to the cotton plantation era. After it ceased to be as productive in the other northern southern states, Florida, they called it Piedmont. Our rich soil was the last stop for cotton. Consequently, that's why we had the largest, the counties with the largest number of plantations. It was 5 contiguous in North Florida, 2 more, Alachua and Marion. So when you think about where African American people came from, to move down south, to move to Jacksonville, to move from DC, they came from a plantation economy. Consequently, they're directly connected then to when emancipation occurred and when we got the news. And I think once those at least who are from Florida, whose DNA reside here, once they understand that knowledge, then they will be more amenable to understanding the historical context of emancipation.
Absolutely. as we close, Donna Cotterell is one of the ones who said there should be a part 2 to this panel discussion. This was rich. And then my good friend Jacqueline Perkins, whose family, her mom and her dad, played a great role here in the city of Tallahassee in the work that they did. And we're working on getting part of Gamble Street, which is part of right off of Florida A&M's campus, named for her parents. She's saying great session. It was very informative. She's looking forward to the next one. So this is, I really didn't get into the empire or power, but it sounds like this is one of those empire sessions where what we're talking about is real stuff, real lives, and real progress. And, you know, as Frederick Douglass says, without the struggle, there's no progress. So tonight we've talked about the struggle. We've talked a little bit about the progress. We've got to be a part of making sure that we continue to progress and make sure that we continue to advocate on behalf. You heard what Senator Thompson said about the gentleman what he said about the Holocaust, and he lost his job. Okay, he lost his job simply because he said what he believed. So words have power. We have power, economic, educational, and otherwise. So let's go forward and use our power to make changes. We will keep this group together, informed, and let's keep the communication going along with those action items that we say that we have. And let's get busy. Let's start with Ms. Barnes with the chronological order that you have, and let's share the Florida statute. For those who don't have it, the one that says that African American history should be taught, and also the one that shows that Juneteenth is saying that when Juneteenth is when all slaves were free, or when the slaves in Florida were free. That's what it says specifically, which we know that is not correct. So we want that corrected, and we want to just wherever we can make those corrections and make sure our history is accurate, as well as making sure that our children and our children's children know their history and know what a proud group of people we are going forward. Any parting words? We were scheduled to end at 6:30. We're a little bit over that, and like Commissioner Proctor, I got a preacher I need to go see at 7 o'clock. So any parting words? Thank you all. Thank you all so very, very much. I appreciate this opportunity, and I hope that our listening audience gains so much from it. And I would be interested in doing another session like this. If you all are willing, just let me know. And let me thank the city of Tallahassee and the Riley House, because you know, you can't take for granted that people will support you in all of your efforts. So here in the city of Tallahassee, we're committed to diversity and inclusion, and this is one of those things. And we have people, you see names like Chase Sims and Tom Bronikowski. Those are non-African Americans, y'all, working to help make this happen for us. And Allison Ferris, who is our communications director, and our city manager, Reese Gold, and our deputy city manager, Cynthia Barber. We thank all of them, and my colleagues on the city commission and my colleagues on the county commission, with Commissioner Proctor, who serves as vice chair this year. Congratulations to you on that. And Chairman Russell, you know what that means, don't you?
I do.
So thank you all so very, very much, and everybody else behind the scenes who made this happen. Have a good night, and we will see you and talk with you soon.
I'll see you.